So we're in the 8th chapter of Ezekiel, and I'm glad that you're here to pay attention to this. We have a place now in history where the Gentile nations that surrounded the Hebrews all had their temples, their priests, their religious practices, their sacrificial elements. But Israel, the nation, was the only one that had the glory of a singular God, capital G, God, Jehovah. And in this sense, when we see all the things that went through in the lead up to the nation of Israel, particularly in the life of Moses, how he was able to get these people into the promised land or to the edge of the promised land, and then allow Joshua to take the reins and to move into that land flowing with milk and honey. We see God's glory becomes present with Moses and the people, the Hebrews. And wherever they went, that went with them. Remember, he had a portable temple. It was a different time. They would pack it up and they would move so many miles, and they would rebuild it, pack it up, and they'd move so many miles. And there became a time when all of a sudden the sins of the people started to overwhelm the goodness of God and all he had done for them. And the sad reality for that was it caused the glory to depart from them. The glory of God left. Romans 9, 1 and 5. I am telling you the truth in Christ. I am not lying. This is Paul talking to the church in Rome. My conscience testifies to me in the Holy Spirit that I have great sorrow. He's talking to them about the fact that his fellow believers, fellow soulmates in the Jewish faith, they had left the Lord. They had left Jehovah. They had left Yahweh. Verse 3, for I could wish that I myself were accursed, separated from Christ for sake of my brethren. The Jewish people did not receive Christ as Messiah. And this really cut to the core of Paul's ministry, because he really wanted his kinsmen according to the flesh, who are the Israelites, to whom belongs the adoption of sons and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the law. In other words, Paul is telling the church in Rome, I have all these people that are my relatives, my friends, my co-members of the tribe of Judah, that now they're lost. They're gone. They have no place in God's plan because they refused to accept the fact that the Messiah has arrived. And this tore him to the core. Exodus 40 and 34, when the cloud covered the tent meeting and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle, all was good. This was one of the signs of how they knew that the glory of the Lord was with them. There was always this cloud over their portable sanctuary, and that meant the presence of God was there. But down at the bottom, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. 1 Samuel, when we go through all of these different messages that come regarding the history and the life of the Hebrew people, we recognize that there's one common theme, and that is when the people ignored Jehovah, their God, when they stopped following the law, and that would have been not just the Ten Commandments, that would have been the basic life centered around the worship that they were required to do. 6 days work, 1 day rest. Don't worship any small g gods, no idols. All that stuff went out the window. They didn't care. And the reality was, when we have these people that come to bear throughout the history, and this is a case of it where the daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was pregnant and about to give birth. She heard the news that the ark of God was taken and that her father-in-law and her husband had died. She kneeled down and gave birth, and her pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, the woman stood by her and said to her, do not be afraid, for you have given birth to a son. but she didn't answer or pay attention. And she called the boy Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel." In other words, she was so distraught because she knew the people had abandoned God, and that meant God went away. Ichabod, in Hebrew, God departs. That's exactly what we find here. The ark of God was taken, and because of her father-in-law and her husband, she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God was taken." It's a sad ending to a story here where all of her life was based on the fact that she was not a prophetess, but she was a teacher of the law. She was one who was very special. And now all of a sudden, because of all the actions that were going on around her, the sinfulness of the nation, the glory of God had departed. And it gives us this kind of picture in our mind's eye about how one day everybody's really happy, going along, life is good, let's party, blah, blah, blah. And then the next day, all of a sudden, the cloud comes and disappears. It's gone. And the people are like, we don't need it anyhow. Have you ever felt that way? Like, oh yeah, who needs God? And that's what exactly happened here. False prophets, false teachers came along and started to teach a false doctrine, and before you know it, everything disappears. 1 Kings 8:11, so that the priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud, the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. And what happens when all of this unfolds? The temple becomes defiled, and everything changes. That's the dramatic vision that Ezekiel now has. The temple's defiled, God's glory is gone, and all of a sudden the people do not have what they once considered to be an immovable part of their life and their history. It's interesting when we think about certain things that the other prophets teach us. Jeremiah, in the 29th chapter, said this, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." So remember, here's Jeremiah, he's in Babylon, he's talking to all the Hebrews that are there. His prophetic message has a purpose. He's working at the same time Ezekiel gets his call. But Jeremiah is he's like a grandfathered-in guy. He's recognized by everybody. Jeremiah says in verse 5, "Build houses and live in them, plant gardens, eat produce, take wives and become the fathers and sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters and multiply there and do not decrease." Jeremiah is encouraging the Hebrews that are in captivity. Be fruitful and multiply. We need to build up our society so that when the Lord decides it's time for us to return, we're numerous. That there's enough of us to go and do the task that God has before us. Verse 7, "Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf," meaning in Babylon, "or in its welfare you will have welfare." One of the things we often don't recognize and talk about is when the Jewish people were taken into slavery into Babylon, all those years that they were there, basically they were not mistreated. They were brought into society and they fulfilled roles. They did work that had to be done. They were doing the things that the Babylonian and Persian kings had tasked them to do. They showed up, did their job, and went home. It was okay. The only thing that was different was they were not allowed to leave. They were, in that sense, oppressed. But basically, Jeremiah is saying, verse number 8, "For thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, do not let your prophets who are in your midst and your diviners deceive you." These false guys came along, and they were trying to get them to change their ways and not worship Jehovah. They were trying to get them to bow down to small g gods and worship like the thing that got them in trouble in the first place. Lessons learned. You can't do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. We learn that in society. We learn that in engineering. We learn that in life. You don't do the same thing 2, 3, 4, 5 times and think you're going to get a different result. That's not how it works. And so he's basically saying, don't listen to these false teachers. Verse 9, for they prophesy falsely to you in my name. This is God talking. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. Wow. And that's when we find that the glory of God is going to be revealed. And it comes to us in a mighty way through the prophecy of Ezekiel. And that's where we get to this 8th chapter. Above everything else, people who serve God have to actually focus on the fact that God is ever present. You know, we say the word omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. He's here at all times, all places, all situations. He's there. There's nothing we can do about it. He is always there. And what we have to make sure is this is not considered to be a burden. This is considered to be a blessing. And when Ezekiel starts to talk here in this 8th chapter, he's focusing on the glory of God. Verse 1, chapter 8. It came about in the 6th year, on the 5th day of the 6th month, as I was sitting in my house with the elders of Judah, sitting before me, that the hand of the Lord fell on me there. So, he's in Babylon, and he's talking with the leadership of the Jewish community, the Hebrews. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he's in the presence of God. Now, I don't know exactly how that works, but what I do know is he said, the hand of the Lord God fell on me there. Then I looked, and behold, a likeness as the appearance of a man. So he's here with this group of fellows, and they're talking and chatting, and my sense would be, it would be like all of a sudden, time stood still. All these people that are gathered around here with him, and they're talking and chit-chatting and whatever, all of a sudden, they're motionless, and he's seeing God. Wow. And so he's having this conversation now, back and forth with the Lord. He talks about his appearance, the brightness, the appearing of glowing metal. Wow. When Moses encountered God, this is in the 33rd chapter of Exodus, verse 18. Then Moses said, and he's talking to the Lord, show me your glory. That's the song I played from third day. Show me your glory. That's where it came from, this verse. Show me your glory. And he, meaning God, said, I myself will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. I will show compassion to whom I will show compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live. Then the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me, and you shall stand there on the rock, and it will come about while my glory is passing by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take my hand away, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. Now, even there, that's pretty cool. God's going to walk right by, or fly, or however God moves, in front of, in this case, Moses. And he's saying, I'm going to put you in the crack here, of this rock, so you won't be able to see me, but once I get past, you'll be able to lift your head up and see my back. And that's the glory of God just passing by. And we know that this is the case that happens. Ezekiel 1:1, he said, the heavens were opened and I saw of visions of God. In the very beginning of his calling. Remember, he's sitting down by the river Kabar, and he's just sitting there relaxing, probably trying to get a suntan. And all of a sudden, God comes out of nowhere and says, you're going to be a spokesman on my behalf. The heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. Chapter 8, verse 4, and behold, the glory of God of Israel was there, like the appearance which I saw in the plain. In other words, he's saying the same thing that was happening when I was called to be a prophet is happening now. That hand, whatever it was that was floating around or coming to touch me, all of a sudden this glory was revealed. And I knew exactly what was going on. And the purpose of all this happening now is because as Ezekiel was in this vision being removed from Babylon, remember he's sitting there with all these elders, okay? And they're motionless, and God's dealing with him. And all of a sudden, he's taken to a faraway place. He's taken to the temple in Jerusalem. This is all going on in his slow motion mind. He wasn't physically moved there, but he was able to see what was going on there. He remained in his house, and he saw what was going on in the temple in Jerusalem. Now, this is something only God could do. I mean, if it were Star Trek, we would think it was being transported, but, that wasn't the case. He didn't have the opportunity for Scotty to transport him from there to there. No, this is God just saying, this is what you're going to see. And all of a sudden, he's looking, and the first thing he saw in the temple was idolatry. And now imagine this. This is the temple of the Lord. It's in Jerusalem. It's the holiest place that the Hebrew nation had. God says, basically, I'm going to take you on a journey here. And he goes and looks, and the first things he sees is all this idol worship going on. And the stages of idolatry were very clear to him. It comes to pass that he's visually seeing in his mind's eye everything that's going on to the smallest detail. Now, this would be, to most of us, would be very frightening. It's like, yikes, what am I doing here? But this is God's hand controlling all the things that Ezekiel is seeing, and he recognizes the fact that this is all a part of what is being done in order to help set the stage for a future time when all this goes away. When he saw the temple and he saw what was going on, here are all these idols. Here are all these idols. And the reality for what it meant in his vision was something that was extremely, to him, I would think, troubling, because the stages of idolatry are something that it doesn't just happen overnight. It has a movement type of thing. In chapter 3, bless you, chapter 8, verse 3, he stretched out the form of a hand and caught me by the lock of my head. This is God doing this to Ezekiel. And he lifted me up between earth and heaven and brought me in the vision of God to Jerusalem, to the entrance of the north gate of the inner court, where the seat of the idol of jealousy, which provokes to jealousy, was located. The first one he sees is the idol of jealousy. Why would there be an idol of jealousy? Behold, the glory of God of Israel was there, like the appearance which I saw in the plain. Then he said to me, Son of man, raise your eyes now toward the north. So I raised my eyes toward the north, and behold, to the north of the altar gate was the idol of jealousy at the entrance. And he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they are doing? The great abominations which the house of Israel are committing here, so that I would be far from my sanctuary? But yet you will still see greater abominations. In other words, this is kind of just like a preview for Ezekiel. He sees this first idol of jealousy. And the idol of jealousy is a euphemism that has to do with the fact that all these small g worshipers were jealous because God of the heavens was so powerful. They could not match him with any of their small g gods, but they were going to show him. we're going to get enough idols that we're going to show you. Yeah, right. That's like, me talking to Mike Tyson and say, watch it, buddy, or I'll take care of you. Yeah. Not going to happen. Forever and a day, right? He said to me, go in and see the wicked abominations, verse 9, that they are committing here. So I entered and looked, and behold, every form, this is great, every form of creeping things and beasts and detestable things with all the idols of the house of Israel were carved on the wall all around. So picture this in Ezekiel's mind. He's looking around at the whole inner walls of the temple, this big, massive structure. What they've done is they've carved, stonemasons have carved niches with idols. Sun, moon, stars, fertility, agriculture, whatever. All throughout this whole temple. It's filled with nothing but little idols. And verse 11, standing in front of them were 70 elders of the house of Israel, with Jahaziah and the sons of Shaphan, standing among them. Each man with his censer, that would be his rod, in his hand, and the fragrance of the cloud of incense rising. So these guys, all these elders, as Bill puts a halls in his mouth, all these elders are standing around all of these small g idols, and they've got their censers. These would be a staff, and the top of the staff had a container that was on fire, and it had smoke coming, and that would be different herbs that filled the air with an aroma. So you got 70 of these guys with 70 different aromas, one for each idol, and they're there doing their thing, and all of a sudden we see this cloud of incense rising. Then he said to me, Son of man, do you see what the elders of the house of Israel are committing in the dark, each man in the room of his carved images? For they say, the Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land. And he said to me, yet you shall see greater still greater abominations, which they are committing. In other words, he's letting Ezekiel know, you ain't seen nothing yet. This is just a small bit of what's going on. And that's why I need you to prophesy. You need to tell these people exactly what's going to be happening. Verse 14, then he brought me to the entrance of the gate of the Lord's house, that's the temple, which was toward the north, and behold, women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. Oh, can't you just see it? The stairs were covered with all these women, and they were prostrate and bowing and crying and doing all this to Tammuz. Who's Tammuz? The goddess of fertility. Yeah, the Greeks called her Diana, or Aphrodites. Tammuz in the Hebrew. Oh, he said, do you see this, son of man? Yet you will still see greater abominations of this. What would be greater than all these women on the stairs to the temple crying out to this god of fertility? Because evidently they can't have kids or something. I don't know what they were doing. But they were sure making a scene. Verse 16, then he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house. Goes back in the temple. And behold, at the entrance to the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar would define the beginning of the Holy of Holies, the most sacred part of the temple. The temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs to the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east. And they were prostrating themselves eastward toward the sun. So, in essence, this is the biggest insult that could happen. They turned their back on the glory of the Lord, and they were laying face down the opposite direction to the sun. They were worshiping the God of the sun. And Jehovah is behind them. What's going to happen? Well, In Exodus to Moses, he said, "You shall not worship them or serve them, for I am the Lord your God, a jealous God." He's telling the Israelites, "You're not going to worship these false people. I'm jealous. I need your attention." And the reality of what would happen is that we see all of a sudden their sins are going to do something difficult. They made him jealous with strange gods. That's the abominations. They were things that you would have never imagined people would be worshiping. And all that did was to push God away. Their sins drove God away. And this was the beginning of the most difficult part of what was going to happen. Exodus 24:10, they saw the God of Israel, and under his feet there appeared to be a pavement of sapphire as clear as the sky itself. Ezekiel 8:12, he said to me, "Son of man, do you see what the elders of the house of Israel are committing?" Down at the bottom, the Lord has forsaken this land. In other words, as they moved and pushed God away, all of a sudden everything was going to change. They were not going to be blessed as they had been blessed. This is the reality of everything that happened when we see all of this going on. Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you, whereby they have forsaken me. It goes on. I am tired of relenting. Can't you see God being frustrated? You guys, I'm done with it. I've had it. It's kind of like when the kids keep doing the bad thing over and over and over. And you say, I've had it. Fortunately, Gloria wouldn't do that. Right? Gloria's a good girl. And what we see happening is when these women are worshiping the fertility god, we recognize the fact that this is just the beginning of some of the abominations that are going on. And in verse number 13, there are still greater abominations that are coming. Down the bottom of 14, they're weeping for Tammuz, this fertility god. And it just is amazing how much we see over and over and over that the people just decline to recognize the reality of who Yahweh is. It's a sad situation. And the fact that he keeps reminding them that there are things that are going to happen. You can't be worshiping a sun god and expect to have blessings from Jehovah. How can you do that? 25 of the greatest leaders in Hebrew history are now gathered around, and they're doing all this in spite of everything that they have been instructed about. How could you worship the sun? I have no idea. But the reality is, do you see this, Son of Man? You will see still greater abominations. Jumping to the end of 16, they were prostrating themselves toward the sun. And knowing that this is the type of thing that's going on, God's ready to pronounce a divine judgment. He's got a divine judgment coming upon them. And this is where the rubber meets the road as far as they are concerned. Remember, Ezekiel's in Babylon. He's in his house. He's got all of this leadership surrounding him. As I stop for a moment. And he's got all these people that are the most important leaders of the nation of Israel that are there in captivity. They're sitting there motionless. He's with the hand of God, viewing all of this stuff going on in Jerusalem. This is a future time. He's prophesying exactly what's going to happen. And this divine judgment is going to be announced. And Ezekiel had only seen, just a part of the evidence that God is providing him regarding this idolatry. He saw the temple idols, and he saw all of this defilement that's going on and all the bad stuff that's happening. Jump here to verse 17. He said to me, "Do you see this, Son of Man? Is it too light a thing for the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they have committed here? That they have filled the land with violence and provoked me repeatedly? Whoa. I think God is upset. When you see a phrase that says, provoked me repeatedly, that's like the ultimate, wait till your father gets home. Yep. You'll see, Buster. Behold, they are putting the twig in their nose. Oh, therefore I indeed will deal in wrath. My eye will have no pity, nor will I spare. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet I will not listen to them. This is a future thing that's going to be happening in Jerusalem. Okay? This is a reality of a time yet to come. This had nothing to do with being taken away in captivity. This is a future time. And I will not listen to them. Oh my goodness. When people do not fear God, they have no worries. That's a part of what society encounters today. If we don't fear retribution for doing the wrong thing, we do the wrong thing. You know, it's part of the things that go on in society now when, not to get political, but when people commit a crime and you don't put them in jail, you just say, okay, bad boy, you don't do it again. And then 2 weeks later, they're in front of the same judge. Now, I told you, don't do it again. And we're going to let you go again. Okay, this time we're going to make you wear an ankle thing. And, you know, there's no consequence. And that means society starts to get upside down. This is exactly what occurs here. The people didn't fear God, so they weren't worried about consequences. Doesn't matter. They just kept doing it. And eventually, as we continue through our studies, we're going to find out the reality of what happens. Because after all the trying, now God does not listen. God does not listen. He's basically left them to their own devices, their own desires, and whatever they want to do, they're going to do. He would not listen to them. And that's the reality of where we find ourselves concluding today. So, Ezekiel 8 and 18 is our closing verse. We're going to read it together, book, chapter, and verse. Okay, you ready? Ezekiel 8:18. Therefore, I indeed will deal in wrath. My eye will have no pity, nor will I spare. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet I will not listen to them. That's the key. He will not listen anymore.